The rain had been falling for 3 hours before I admitted I was lost. I stood at the iron gate of a mansion I did not recognize, with a sealed letter pressed flat against my chest beneath my coat and water running in cold rivers down the back of my neck. The street sign at the corner had been split in half by a fallen branch, one of the autumn storms that tore through the capital's harbor district without warning or apology. And I had made a choice between two dark roads based entirely on a guess. Guesses in my profession were things you were not supposed to make. I was a courier. I delivered letters. I did not guess. I read addresses. I memorized routes. I arrived on time and without questions. That was the work. That was the contract. But tonight the storm had swallowed the city, and my lantern had gone out 2 blocks back, and the sealed letter inside my coat bore the instruction, "Deliver to Ravenscar Mansion. After midnight, do not announce yourself at the front. Go to the servants' gate, knock 3 times, and leave the parcel with whoever answers. Do not look at the seal. Do not ask questions. Do not open it under any circumstances." The seal was pressed in black wax. I had not looked at it closely, because I had been paid very well not to. The iron gate before me was not the servants' gate of Ravenscar Mansion. I knew this because the gate was enormous, tipped with iron lilies, and bore a crest I had seen once before on a city proclamation. A Valhart crest, a single silver flame above crossed branches. Valhart House. The estate of Duchess Seraphine Valhart, the woman every broadsheet in the capital called the Ice Queen, the woman who had reportedly reduced a finance minister to tears with 4 written sentences and no raised voice. The woman whose name was spoken more carefully than most people spoke the names of judges or priests. I had knocked 3 times before I fully understood where I was. The servants' gate swung open. A man in a dark livery coat looked at me with the particular expression of someone who had been told to expect a delivery and was unsurprised by it. He held out his hand without speaking. I should have said something then. I should have said I have the wrong address. Forgive me, I'm leaving. But I was exhausted. I was soaked to the bone, my coat weighed twice what it should, and the letter in my chest had been pressing against my ribs for 3 hours. I handed it over. The man took it. He nodded once and stepped back. The gate closed. I stood in the rain for a full 10 seconds, understanding what I had just done. I had delivered a sealed, secret letter. Addressed to Ravenscar Mansion, marked with an unknown crest, paid for by a client whose name I had been instructed not to ask, to Valhart House. I knocked again. No one answered. I knocked harder, and the gate opened again, and the same manservant looked at me with exactly the same expression. "I need that letter back," I said. "I made a mistake. Wrong address." "The letter has been brought inside," he said. "Then bring it back outside." "That is not within my authority." "Whose authority does it fall within?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he opened the gate wider and stood aside. That was how I came to walk, dripping through the servants' entrance of Valhart House at midnight, on the worst night of autumn, following a silent manservant through marble corridors lit by candles that burned in long iron holders shaped like bare-branched trees. The house was enormous, and it was almost entirely silent. My wet boots squeaked against the floor, and the sound echoed, and I was mortified. The portraits in the corridor, generations of Valharts, pale and composed and watchful, seemed deeply unimpressed. I was brought into a sitting room and told to wait. I waited. The fire in the grate was low but warm. I stood close to it because I could not stop shivering. The room was full of things that cost more than I earned in a year. A glass cabinet filled with mineral specimens, a writing desk with an inlaid surface of dark wood and mother of pearl, curtains of heavy wine-colored velvet that pooled onto the floor. There was an untouched tray of food on a side table, bread, sliced fruit, cold meat, and a teacup that had not been drunk, still faintly steaming. Someone had been in here before me and had not eaten. The door opened. I turned around. She was taller than I had imagined, which was strange, because I had not known I had imagined anything. She wore a dressing robe of dark charcoal silk over a high-collared nightgown, and her hair, nearly black with one pale streak near the temple, was loosely pinned at the back of her neck with what looked like a simple silver comb. She was not dressed for company. She was dressed for someone who had been awake alone, and that detail alone made her seem more real and more alarming than any formal portrait could have. Duchess Seraphine Valhart was 35 years old, according to the gossip of the courier districts. She looked like time had treated her as a collaborator, not an enemy. Her face was all clean lines and composed stillness. The kind of stillness that is not emptiness, but control. Her eyes were a shade between gray and green, and they moved across me with a precision that felt almost clinical. She was holding my letter. "Your name," she said. Not a question. An opening move. "Celia Wren," I said, because there was nothing else to say. "I'm a courier with the Harrow Street office. I made a mistake tonight. The sign at the corner of Dusk and Marlow was broken, and I took the wrong road. That letter was meant for Ravenscar Mansion. I need it back." She looked at the letter. She turned it over in her hands. Once. The seal was black wax. I watched her thumb move over it slowly, and my stomach pulled tight. "You haven't opened it," I said. "Give it back and we'll pretend this didn't happen. I'll redeliver it. No one needs to know." "I opened it?" she said. I went very still. "You—" My voice came out wrong, too small. "That letter is sealed property. It's a criminal breach. I could lose my license. The client, Duchess Seraphine Valehart said, is Lord Aldrich Calethorn." She said the name like she was placing a chess piece on a board, with precision, with knowledge of where the move would land. "The seal," she continued, turning the broken wax gently in her fingers, "is the private seal of Lady Odette Ravenscar." She held it up for a moment so I could see it, not to prove a point, but to confirm one. The letter was addressed to the servants' entrance of Ravenscar Mansion, with instructions not to announce, which means Lady Odette intended to receive communication from Lord Calethorn without her household staff being aware of it. And the letter itself, she glanced down at the open page in her other hand. "The letter itself names me by title in regard to several transactions I have kept private for reasons of personal security, and outlines a proposal for how both parties might benefit from my removal from the Autumn Council proceedings." I understood then that I was not merely in the wrong house. I was standing in the center of something that had been in motion long before tonight. "Also," she said, and her voice did not change pitch, but something shifted in it. Something almost quiet. There is a section near the bottom of the second page that describes in some detail a young female courier with brown hair and a Harrow Street mark on her satchel who was to be engaged this evening to deliver a sealed parcel to Ravenscar Mansion. The letter notes that this courier was selected specifically because she is not known to have any connections to my household, and therefore, if something unfortunate were to happen in the course of the delivery, there would be no clear thread leading back to either of them. I stopped breathing. "Something unfortunate," I repeated. "The word used," Duchess Seraphine said, "is manageable." The fire crackled. Outside, the rain hit the windows. The untouched teacup steamed between us. She looked at me then, not in the way she had when I came in, clinically assessing, but in a different way. Quieter, more careful. "Sit down, Miss Wren," she said. "You're dripping on my floor. You've clearly not eaten, and you're not going anywhere tonight. Not because I'm keeping you here. Because whoever hired you to deliver this letter almost certainly has someone watching the road between this estate and Ravenscar Mansion. And if you walk out of that gate in the dark, there is a reasonable chance you will not arrive safely at wherever you are planning to go next." I sat down. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, So if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. She did not look at me while she moved to the writing desk. She set the letter down carefully, pressed it flat with one hand, and then turned away to pour herself a cup of tea from the pot near the window. She did not pour one for me, but she moved the tray of food from the side table and set it closer to the chair where I was sitting. She did it without comment. It took me a moment to realize she had done it on purpose. "You knew," I said. She turned slightly. "That you hadn't eaten? I deduced. That something like this was being planned. You weren't surprised by that letter." She considered. She took a slow sip of tea. She set the cup down on the corner of the desk. "I have been expecting a move from that quarter for some time," she said. "I did not know the shape it would take. This," she touched the letter lightly. "This is more specific than I anticipated, more documented. Lord Calethorn is apparently feeling bold. Boldness in stupid men is usually fear wearing expensive clothes," I said, and then I pressed my mouth shut, because I did not know what had possessed me to say that to a duchess. There was a silence. She looked at me for the first time since she had told me to sit down. Directly, with real attention, the kind that made the back of my neck feel warm despite everything. "Clever observation for someone who delivers parcels for a living," she said. "Couriers hear a great deal," I said carefully. "We're expected to be invisible. People forget to moderate their conversations in front of us. And are you invisible, Miss Wren?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I've never managed it." She almost smiled. I would not call it a smile. It was the idea of a smile, the shadow of one, a thing that passed across her face and disappeared before I could be certain it had been there. But I saw it. And it occurred to me, sitting in a puddle on a very old chair in a very cold mansion in the worst storm of the year, that I had just made Duchess Seraphine Valhart almost smile, and that this was either the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me, or the beginning of something I was not equipped to survive. It turned out to be both. She gave me dry clothes, a plain dark dress from the household stores, wool stockings, and a pair of slippers that were a size too large. A maid showed me to a room 3 doors from the library, with a bed that had more pillows than I had owned in my life. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain. Through the wall, I could hear the faint sound of movement. Footsteps, then stillness. Then what I thought might be a chair being pulled out. Then the scratch of a pen. She was writing. I fell asleep wondering what she was writing, and I woke up to gray light and silence, and the distant smell of bread being baked somewhere in the lower floors of the house. My friend Nessa always said I had a talent for falling into things. Not misfortune exactly, but situations. Complex, layered situations that other people manage to avoid by being more boring than me. "You have a face that says, 'Tell me the dangerous thing,'" Nessa used to say, usually when we were eating stale bread after a particularly strange delivery route, and I was recounting whatever had gone wrong that week. "I don't have that face," she would add, very smugly, eating her bread in peace. I thought about Nessa that morning as I sat in the Valhart library pretending to be calm. She would have turned herself around at the gate. She would have said wrong address, not my problem, and walked back into the rain and found the right mansion and been done with it. She would have slept in her own bed. The library was full of books that looked like they were actually read. That surprised me. Rich people's libraries often looked like furniture, arranged for appearance, dusted by someone else. This library had books with cracked spines and folded corners, books stacked on the floor beside the reading chairs, because the shelves were already full, books with slips of paper tucked between the pages like unfinished conversations. There was a correspondence cabinet along one wall, deeply organized, with labels and handwriting I recognized from the letter. Sharp, precise, unsentimental. "You read the handwriting?" said a voice. I turned. Seraphine stood in the doorway in a morning dress of deep slate gray, her hair neatly pinned now, no evidence of last night's looseness. She was every inch the Duchess again. Whatever quiet version of herself she had been at midnight had been tucked away behind the composure. "I notice handwriting," I said. "It's a professional habit." "What does mine tell you?" She asked it without coyness, as if she genuinely wanted to know what I could read. "Controlled," I said. "The letters don't vary much in pressure or direction, which means you write the same whether you're calm or upset. You hold things in when you work. But your E's lift at the end, a very small thing, which suggests you were taught to write one way and naturally drift toward another. Someone corrected your handwriting when you were young. You still remember the correction, but you've compromised with it." She was quiet for a moment. "My governess," she said. "She spent 2 years trying to make my letters more vertical. She failed." I did not say anything. She walked into the room and stood at the correspondence cabinet for a moment, not opening it, just standing. It was such a small gesture of self-containment, the way she touched the corner of the cabinet without opening it, that I looked away. "I need to tell you what I believe has happened," she said, "and what I believe your position in it to be. After that, you may make your own choices. I won't keep you here against your will. That was not a condition of last night's hospitality." She told me clearly and without embellishment. Lord Aldrich Calethorn had been attempting to acquire the Valahart Coastal Holdings, a stretch of harbor-facing property that had belonged to her family for 3 generations, through a combination of legal maneuvering and social pressure. He had not managed it. She had an advisor who had blocked him at every turn. That advisor had recently become ill, and his absence had apparently given Calethorn the opening he was looking for. Lady Odette Ravenscar was his social weapon, charming, well-connected, and capable of shaping the narratives that moved through the capital's upper circles like weather. If Seraphine was removed from the Autumn Council proceedings, by scandal, by manufactured disgrace, by any means, the vote on the coastal property dispute would proceed without her voice, and Calethorn would win. The letter I had delivered was an operational correspondence, not a personal note. It outlined the next several steps in a plan that had clearly been underway for months. "And the part about me," I said, "was practical," she said without apparent emotion. "You were hired for this delivery specifically because you would be easy to discredit or silence if the letter went wrong. A courier with no noble connections, a Harrow Street mark, alone at midnight in a rainstorm. If you were found outside Ravenscar Mansion with a damaged or missing parcel, or if you were found at all without the parcel having been successfully delivered." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. I pressed my hands flat against my knees and breathed slowly. "So I was supposed to be the disposable piece," I said. "You were supposed to be invisible," she said, and her voice had something in it that I could not name then and thought about for weeks afterward. "As you said, people are careless in front of couriers. What do you need from me?" She turned to look at me directly. "I need a courier who understands codes, seals, and routes," she said. "Someone who can move through the city without drawing the notice that my own household staff would draw. Someone who knows the correspondence networks well enough to trace where letters have been and where they're going." A pause. "I am prepared to pay you very well, and to ensure that Lord Calethorn's attention is redirected away from you personally. In exchange, I need your help, discreetly, for as long as it takes to collect enough evidence to bring this in front of the Autumn Council." I thought about my attic room, and the rent that was due next week, and the Harrow Street office manager who had been looking for an excuse to reduce my route assignments. And I thought about the word manageable in a letter that referred to me by hair color. "Yes," I said. Her eyes held mine for a moment. Then she looked away. "We'll begin this afternoon," she said. We did not begin this afternoon. We began immediately, with me explaining the seal on the letter, black wax but unusual in composition, heavier than standard issue, with a grain to it that suggested a northern supplier rather than a city stationer. Seraphine listened with her arms folded and her head slightly tilted. not writing anything down, but clearly storing everything I said with the same precision as the correspondence cabinet behind her. The weeks that followed were not what I would have called comfortable. Seraphine was not comfortable. She was exacting, thorough, and accustomed to a standard of work that she applied to everyone around her, including herself. She did not praise. She did not offer warmth in any conventional sense, but she remembered every detail I gave her. She never dismissed an observation I made, and she had a way of posing a question that made me feel as though my answer was the most important information available. Not because she was flattering me, but because she was genuinely curious. I began visiting Valhart House 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. I carried letters for her. Real ones, addressed to real places with proper seals, but also messages folded inside messages, second pieces of paper tucked behind formal correspondence, codes built into the pattern of ink spots on envelope flaps, the kind of misdirection that only worked if you understood both how letters moved and how people expected them to move. In between, I went home to my attic room on Gallows Lane and ate my supper and thought about what I was getting myself into. Nessa came to find me on a Tuesday evening in early autumn, appearing at my door with 2 meat pies and an expression of deep suspicion. "You've been peculiar for 2 weeks," she announced. "You smell like expensive candles. What's happening?" "I took on a private client," I said. "What client?" I hesitated for half a second too long. Nessa's eyebrows went up. "Is this a dangerous situation?" "It is. I can tell by the way you're pretending it isn't." "It's complicated," I said. "Celia? Sweetheart. The most dangerous words in your vocabulary." I told her most of it, leaving out the parts that felt like they weren't mine to share. She ate her pie in silence and stared at me with the particular expression she used when she was deciding whether to be sensible or supportive. "Be careful," she said finally. "I'm always careful." "You are not always careful." "You knocked on a gate in a midnight rainstorm and gave a letter to an ice duchess and then sat in her house for breakfast. I was exhausted and it was raining. And now you're working for her?" "Yes." Another silence. Then Nessa said, very carefully, "Is she as frightening as they say?" I thought about Seraphine standing at the correspondence cabinet, touching its edge without opening it. I thought about the untouched tray of food the first night. I thought about the almost smile. "She's more frightening," I said, "and also entirely different from what they say." Nessa looked at me for a long moment. She took a very deliberate bite of pie. "You like her," she said. "I don't know her well enough to like her," I said. Nessa said nothing. She had a talent for loaded silences. I ate my pie and refused to elaborate, and she went home eventually with the satisfied expression of someone who has confirmed their theory without needing a confession. She was not wrong. But she was ahead of me, as she so often was. The greenhouse was what changed it first. Seraphine had a glass greenhouse at the west end of Valehart House, separated from the main building by a stone-floored passage. It was built for roses, primarily climbing roses, white and deep red, trained along iron frames. But she also kept other winter plants, pale blue hyacinths, forced tulips, a lemon tree that had no business surviving this far north and clearly did not care. The greenhouse was warm in the way that only enclosed spaces full of growing things could be, a specific warmth that felt alive rather than mechanical, and it smelled like damp earth and green stems and something faintly sweet that I could never identify precisely. I found her there one evening when I arrived early with a report. She was standing with her back to the door, her hands clasped behind her, looking at the lemon tree. She was not doing anything. She was simply standing and looking. I had never seen her simply stand and look at something before. She was always working, composing letters, reading documents, giving quiet instructions. But in the greenhouse, in the gray evening light, she was still. I almost backed away. I thought I was interrupting something private. But she heard the door and turned, and the stillness didn't leave her face. It just shifted slightly. "You're early," she said. "I came by a shorter route. I have information about the Calethorn land filings." She nodded. Come in then. I'm nearly done here. I stepped in, and the warmth wrapped around me immediately. She turned back to the lemon tree and touched one of its branches, just lightly, the back of her fingers against the leaves. It should have died 3 winters ago, she said. My gardener tells me every year. Does he recommend letting it go? Constantly. A pause. I don't. I set my satchel down near the door and waited. I was learning when to wait with her and when to push. This was a waiting moment. My mother planted it, she said after a long pause, still not turning. She was fond of impossible things. I did not say I'm sorry for your loss because it would have felt like a condescension. I just held the silence for her while she looked at the tree, and after a moment, she turned and walked toward me, with her composure entirely restored. And we went into the library and talked about land filings for 2 hours, but I kept thinking about the lemon tree. The evidence began to take shape in November. I had traced the black wax supplier to a northern import house that also supplied several city merchants, one of whom, a man named Peller, kept accounts at a counting house that showed regular transfers to a holding entity connected to one of Calethorne's secondary properties. It was not proof of conspiracy, not yet, but it was a thread. I had also, through careful reading of the city's public correspondence records, identified 3 letters filed under false names that used the same ink grain pattern as Lady Odette's personal stationery. Small things, layered things, the kind of connections that only someone who spent their working life studying the physical evidence of correspondence would know to look for. Seraphine listened to each development with the same precision. She added it to what she was building, a legal case, something solid enough to bring to the council. She had connections of her own, a solicitor she trusted, a former household steward who now worked in the archives, a woman named Countess Breval who moved in exactly the same social circles as Odette and had reasons of her own to want the truth brought forward. In early November, we attended the Breval salon together for the first time. Together being a careful term, since I attended as her private secretary, a role that was not entirely false. I had never been inside a noble salon. Nessa would have said that no amount of borrowed confidence was going to get me through an evening with 50 aristocrats, and she would not have been wrong. I had been given a dress from the Valhart household stores, navy wool, well-fitted, plain enough to pass for professional, and I walked in beside Seraphine with my spine as straight as I could manage, which was apparently straight enough. Lady Odette Ravenscar was there. I recognized her from the descriptions I had collected. Golden-haired, small-framed, dressed in shades of ivory and blush, with a smile that worked like a net. Warm and welcoming and specifically placed, she moved through the room like she had designed it. She was genuinely charming, the kind of charming that makes you distrust your own distrust. And when she turned that charm on me, briefly while greeting Seraphine, I understood exactly why people believed her. "Your new secretary," she said pleasantly, studying me in a way that was almost gentle. "How delightful. I didn't know you were looking." "I am always looking," Seraphine said, in a tone that gave away nothing and implied everything. Odette laughed. It was a beautiful laugh. She moved on. I stayed beside Seraphine for the rest of the evening, noting things. The way Odette's eye contact worked, the specific people she spent more than 2 minutes with, the angle she chose when she positioned herself near Lord Calethorne's associate, a thin-shouldered man named Berwick who appeared to be pretending not to know her. On the carriage ride back through the rain-wet streets, I told Seraphine everything I had noticed. She listened, then she said, "You see the way I see." I didn't know what to do with that. I looked out the window at the passing lamps. "It's a courier's habit," I said. "It is a particular kind of intelligence," she said, without inflection, and did not say anything else until we arrived back at Valehart House. The first crack appeared on a Thursday morning in late November. I had been sent on a private delivery, a communication to Countess Breval, nothing unusual. But on the way back, I had stopped at the hidden archive at the lower end of the Civic Records building, following a lead I had not told Seraphine about, because I wanted to be certain first. I had found what I was looking for. A filing of land seizure authorization dated 2 months earlier, bearing a signature that was either a forgery or a very deliberate misuse of an old title authorization. It named Seraphine's coastal property specifically. It named a takeover date, and on the margin in a different hand were 2 words: use her. I had stood in the archive for a long time looking at those 2 words, understanding that the her was almost certainly me. When I brought it back to Seraphine, she was in the library. She read it again. She set it on the desk very precisely, aligned it with the corner of the desk pad, and then she stood very still. "This is dated," she said. "2 months ago," I said, "before I found you." She said it quietly, almost to herself. They had been planning this specific approach for 2 months. The courier, the misdirection, using your body as a message in itself. Someone who could be discarded if it failed. "Seraphine!" She turned away from me. She walked to the window. The winter rain was starting outside, that fine gray drizzle that turned the whole city silver, and she stood with her back to me, and I could see the exact moment when her controlled posture changed. Not dramatically, not the way you might see in a stage play, but a small, precise change, like a door closing. "I knew they were moving against me," she said very quietly. "I did not know they were prepared to." She stopped. Started again. "You were in the path of something deliberate, Miss Wren. From the beginning. Not incidental. Chosen." "I know. And you continued working on this anyway." "I needed the money," I said. And then I paused. I didn't want to leave it unfinished. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned around and her face was composed again. Almost. There were fine lines of tension around her eyes that I had not seen before. "The filing will go to Solicitor Vane this afternoon," she said. "Thank you, Miss Wren." "Are you all right?" She looked at me directly. The question seemed to surprise her, not because it was impertinent, but because she had not been asked it in some time. "No," she said after a moment. "Not particularly." And then, before I could respond, she added, "But I'm very rarely all right, and it does not prevent me from working." I took a step toward her. I was not sure what I intended to do. Offer something, probably, some gesture of ordinary human contact. She took a very small step backward, not in retreat, in refusal. "Don't," she said, not harshly, almost gently. "I am not," she pressed her lips together. "I manage better without that." I stopped. I nodded. I picked up my satchel. "I'll come back tomorrow," I said. "Yes," she said. "I'll have further instructions." I walked home in the gray rain and thought about a woman who managed better without comfort, and whether she had decided that was true, or whether it had simply been true for so long that she no longer remembered choosing it. December arrived, and with it the masquerade of the Autumn Council, the social event that preceded the formal council sessions by 5 days, an occasion at which half the city's political alliances were silently restructured over wine and anonymous masks. Seraphine attended every year. This year she asked me to attend as well. She did not ask me as her secretary this time. She brought me a dress herself, brought it to my attic room on Gallows Lane, arriving with her single attendant and a covered box and the expression of someone who had done something unprecedented and intended to treat it as ordinary. The dress was deep gold silk with a high neck and fitted sleeves, and it fit me with a precision that meant she had either guessed or observed more carefully than I had realized. "I can't accept this," I said. "You need something to wear," she said. "I have a dress. You have the navy wool. It is professional. This event is not professional." I held the silk up. The candlelight turned it amber. "You're putting me on display," I said, because it was true, and someone had to say it. "I am ensuring," she said, "that when Lady Odette attempts to introduce you as my paid companion, or my servant, or my instrument, the room has already formed an impression of you that she cannot revise." She paused. "You will be yourself. You will speak well because you always speak well, and I would like people to see that you are not what Odette intends to claim you are." I looked at her for a moment. She met my eyes without shifting. "All right," I said. The masquerade was held at the Cavendrel Hall, 6 blocks from the harbor, an old building with a marble entrance hall and an inner ballroom that smelled like candle wax and a century of important decisions. I arrived with Seraphine, which caused exactly as much notice as I had expected. People looked, people whispered, people arranged their faces into neutrality with varying degrees of success. I wore the gold silk. I wore a half mask of hammered brass that Seraphine's attendant had brought with the dress. I kept my spine straight and my voice low and my observations constant. Seraphine wore gray and silver and a mask the color of frost, and she moved through the room like she owned not just the hall, but the principle of halls in general, and I stayed close enough to be present without being a shadow. Odette found us within 20 minutes. She was in ivory and gold, her mask feathered and delicate, and she smiled at me in a way that was warm and carefully constructed. "And who is this charming woman?" she asked Seraphine, as though she had not already met me twice. "Celia Wren," I said before Seraphine could answer. "Independent courier contractor, licensed through the Harrow Street office. Perhaps you've seen our mark? We handle private correspondence for several noble houses." A flicker in Odette's smile, nothing visible to anyone not looking for it. "How interesting," she said. "Quite," I said. "We handle a remarkable volume of letters. You'd be surprised what comes through the office, the variety of seals alone." The flicker again. Then she excused herself, gracefully, perfectly. Seraphine turned her head slightly toward me. She said nothing, but I thought I caught, at the very edge of her mouth, the shadow of something that might have been satisfaction. I found the evidence at the hidden archive in January, or rather, I did not find it at the archive. I found it at the harbor. I had been following the money thread from the Peller accounts through to a shipping concern that operated out of the South Docks, and I had gone there myself in the pre-dawn morning, too early for the usual dock traffic, with my satchel and my courier mark visible enough to give me plausible reason to be there. What I found in a locked correspondence room of the Peller shipping office reached through a back window that a more cautious woman would not have climbed through, was a full bundle of letters, coded in the same system I had already identified, spanning 11 months and detailing every step of the campaign against Seraphine's property and council position, including the original instruction to hire a specific type of courier, Harrow Street mark, female, solitary, no noble connections, including a description that fit me as though written after observation. They had been watching the courier offices for months. They had chosen me. I took copies. I replaced the originals. I climbed back out the window and walked very quickly through the harbor fog to the nearest street lamp and stood under it for a moment breathing before I started walking in the direction of Valehart House. I arrived before 8 in the morning, and the maid looked at me as though I had gone slightly mad, which I had. Seraphine came down from her rooms in a dressing robe not unlike the one from the first night. She took one look at me and said, "What happened?" "I have everything," I said. She went still. "Not a question," I said. "I mean, I actually have everything. The full correspondence archive? 11 months, all of it coded in the same system. I have copies here." I put the copies on the library desk. "The originals are still in place. We need Solicitor Vane today, this afternoon, before anyone goes near that building." She looked at the papers. She looked at me. She looked at the slight tear on my sleeve where I had caught it on the window frame. "You climbed in through a window," she said. "Second floor. It wasn't that high." "Celia." It was the first time she had ever said my given name. She said it without appearing to notice she had, which made it worse somehow, made it land directly in the center of my chest. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm cold and I want tea, but I'm fine." She had tea sent up. She sat across from me at the library table while we went through the documents together, page by page, and she did not once tell me that I had done something reckless or that the risk had been unnecessary. She only said, when we had sorted the last paper, "This is everything we need." "I know," I said. She looked at me across the papers. The morning light was coming in through the tall windows, pale and winter-thin, and it fell across her face in a way that made her look less composed than usual. Not less herself, but more, somehow, more everything. There were shadows under her eyes. She had been working late again. She worked late most nights that I knew of. "Why did you do this alone?" she asked quietly. "You could have told me first." "Because if I had told you, you would have found a safer way," I said. "And the safer way might have taken another month and given them time to move the documents." She was quiet for a moment. "That's probably true," she said. "I know it is." Another silence. Then, "Thank you, Celia." I became extraordinarily interested in the paper in front of me. It was a few evenings later when it broke. Really broke, the way something does after long compression. I had been out on a secondary route, carrying legitimate courier business, and I had taken a shortcut through the old Chandler's district that I had used 100 times without incident. But someone had been waiting there. 2 men, unhired in any sense I could trace, who wanted to know what a Harrow Street courier was doing for the Valehart household, and specifically what she had taken from the South Docks last week. I had run. I knew the Chandler's district better than they did, and I was faster, and I made it to the main road and all the way to Valehart House before I allowed myself to stop moving. My hands were shaking by the time the gate opened. The cut on my palm from gripping a wall to catch myself was dripping blood on the cobblestones, and I was embarrassed about it, which was not the most rational response to nearly being cornered in an alley. But there it was. Seraphine was in the entrance hall. She had been told I was coming, apparently. The gatekeeper had sent word ahead. And she was standing near the bottom of the stairs with a look on her face that I had not seen before. It was not calm. "You're bleeding," she said, and she crossed the hall faster than I expected, and she took my hand, took it, and turned it over to look at the cut. And I felt the warmth of her fingers around my wrist with an intensity entirely disproportionate to the occasion. "It's minor," I said. "I'm sorry for the floor." "I don't care about the floor." She looked up from my hand to my face. "What happened?" I told her. She listened very still while a maid came with a cloth and she cleaned the cut herself, without delegating it, without stepping back. Her hands were careful and unhurried, despite the tension in the set of her jaw. When I had finished telling her, she was quiet for a moment. "They know what you took from the docks," she said, "or they suspect. Yes. This is my fault. It's Kelthorne's fault. I put you in this position." Her voice was controlled and very quiet. "I engaged you for this work knowing there was risk. I told myself it was manageable. That word." Something crossed her face at that. "I used the same word they used about you in that letter." "Seraphine, I am aware," she said very precisely, "that I am not infallible. I am aware that knowing someone is in danger and attempting to mitigate that danger is not the same as successfully protecting them. I know this. And I also—" She stopped. The cloth was still in her hands. She was not looking at me. "I also find that knowing all of that does not help me in the slightest when you are standing in my entrance hall bleeding. I had accused her in my head on many occasions of caring while pretending not to." I said now quietly, "You're frightened." She looked at me. "For me?" I said. "You were frightened. I am not accustomed," she said slowly, "to people I—" She stopped again. The tension in her was visible now, the way water looks just before it changes temperature. "To people who matter being in positions I cannot control. I matter, I said. Not a question. She looked at me for a long time, with the cloth still in her hands and my wrist still in her grip, and the entrance hall was completely silent except for the fire and the distant rain. Celia, she said, and her voice came out differently than usual. Stripped of its composure, just her voice, just her. Caring for you has become the one thing I cannot command myself to stop doing. And I have tried. I want you to know that I have tried, because it would have been safer for both of us if I had managed it. I leaned forward and kissed her. I did not plan to. I am not sure I decided to. It felt more like something that had been waiting and finally found the moment. She made a sound, very quiet, almost surprised. And then she kissed me back, and it was not tentative and it was not cautious. It was the kiss of someone who had been withholding something significant for some time and had finally been given permission to stop. When we broke apart, we were both breathing differently. She looked at me with her composure completely gone, which I had wanted to see for months and which was in fact even more affecting than I had imagined. "This is not safer," she said. "No," I agreed. She raised her free hand and touched my face, just briefly, the backs of her fingers against my cheek. And then she stepped back and the composure began to return, quietly, piece by piece. But her eyes were different. Warmer, unmistakably different. "Let me see to that cut properly," she said. "Then we need to decide how to proceed." The days after the kiss were strange in the precise way that changed things always are. Not uncomfortable, not strained, but aware. Everything had a second layer to it now, a depth that had always been there and was now simply acknowledged. When I came to Veilheart House in the mornings, Seraphine's manner had not changed in any obvious way. She remained precise and controlled and exacting. But there was something newly deliberate in the small things. The tea that appeared without my asking, the chair that was always positioned to receive the best light when I was working in the library, the way she sometimes paused in the middle of dictating a letter to look at me for a moment before continuing. I cataloged these things the way I cataloged seals and handwriting, professionally, against my own better judgment. Nessa, when she found me staring at nothing in my attic room one evening with my supper going cold, said nothing at all. She simply sat down, opened the wine she had brought, and waited with the patient silence of someone who intended to outlast the problem. Eventually I told her what had happened, in vague terms, omitting the exact words, but probably not omitting the way my voice changed when I talked about them. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I'm terrified," I said. That's not what I asked. I thought about the entrance hall and the candlelight and Seraphine's composure coming entirely apart and the warmth of her hands. "Yes," I said. "I think I might be." Nessa poured the wine. "Then stop eating cold supper and let it be what it is." I was trying. I was genuinely trying, but the fear did not disappear. It changed shape, which was not the same as diminishing. Where before I had feared the conspiracy and the danger and the physical risk of the work, now I feared something softer and more durable, that I was someone who did not fit. Not in Veilheart House, not in the world Seraphine moved through, not in any version of the future I could honestly imagine for the two of us. I was the Harrow Street courier. I was the woman in borrowed dresses and borrowed slippers. I delivered other people's letters and lived in a room where the ceiling slanted so steeply that I could only stand upright in one corner. The world had made it clear to me repeatedly how it classified people like me, and the world was very attentive to Seraphine. Every decision she made, every appearance, every association, was watched and commented upon and analyzed. I had heard the salon whispers with my own ears. I had watched Odette's beautiful smile construct a narrative from nothing. It came to a head on a Wednesday in December, when I arrived at Veilheart House to find Lord Calethorn's legal secretary, waiting in the entrance hall with a letter addressed to Seraphine. The letter was not private. It was a formal notice, the kind of thing that went through open channels. I waited while Seraphine read it, and I watched her face for any change. There was a change. Very small. Very controlled. The letter was a formal request for the council to investigate Seraphine's personal associations as potentially compromising her position in the coastal land dispute. It did not name me explicitly. It used the phrase irregular attachments to persons of undetermined social standing, which was a very elegant way of naming me without naming me. "It's leverage," Seraphine said, setting the letter down. "They can't win on the evidence, so they're attempting a social maneuver." "Will it work?" I asked. She did not answer immediately, which meant the answer was more complicated than no. "Seraphine," I said, "will it work? Calethorn has allies on the council who care a great deal about the appearance of propriety," she said. "If there is anything that can be framed as inappropriate behavior on my part, personal or professional, they will use it to call for a delay in proceedings. A delay benefits him. The longer the dispute is unsettled, the more resources he can commit to his legal strategy." I picked up my satchel from the floor beside my chair. I stood up. She watched me. "I'm going home," I said. I think I need to think." She said nothing. That was worse than if she had argued. I walked to the door, and I stopped with my hand on the frame, and I said without turning, "I'm not leaving the work. I just need to be somewhere that isn't here for a while." "All right," she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. I went home to my attic room. I sat on my bed and looked at the slanting ceiling. I thought about everything Seraphine had done for me, the protection, the work, the tea that appeared, the chair and the light. And then I thought about irregular attachments, and I thought about her position on the council, and her estates, and her name, and the 18 years she had spent building a reputation formidable enough that men like Calethorn feared it. She had spent 18 years on that. I had been here for 3 months. I told myself I was leaving Veilheart House for her sake, that I was removing myself as a liability, that it was practical and intelligent and the right choice. I half believed it, which made it both true and a lie. The week that followed was the longest week I had spent in years. I did my regular courier routes, I made my regular deliveries. I sat in the Harrow Street office and ate bread and read the assignment ledger and said very little to anyone. The rain was constant and irritating. My room was cold. My ceiling was still slanting. Everything that had felt acceptable before I walked into the wrong mansion on a stormy night now felt very specifically insufficient. And I knew, with the pragmatic honesty that was the only thing I could always count on in myself, that this was not the attic room's fault. I sent a brief message to Seraphine through an intermediate address. "Continuing work from Gallows Lane, I have followed up on the Peller Trail. Will report when I have more. Businesslike, appropriate." She replied in the same register. Her handwriting, even in a short note, was precise and unsentimental. I read it 3 times. I put it in the drawer under my spare satchel. After 4 days, Countess Breval sent me a note of her own. Not through Seraphine, directly to my address, in handwriting that was generous and slightly theatrical. It said, "She has canceled 2 social engagements, dismissed her seamstress appointment, and eaten approximately nothing since Monday. I am telling you this because I am fond of her, and she will not tell you herself. Whatever you are deciding, decide it soon." I sat with that note for a long time. Then I put on my coat and I went to the harbor, and I found what I found in the warehouse at the Peller Pier, and I walked to Veilheart House before 8 in the morning because the work required it, but also because I had made my decision, and it was not the practical one. We proceeded in January with a formal session before the Autumn Council, delayed by weather and by the maneuvering of both sides, arriving finally on a morning of pale winter sun that made the Civic Hall look almost welcoming. Seraphine's solicitor, Vane, had built the case over several weeks from the documents I had copied, the archive filings, the Peller account records, and a detailed testimony from Countess Bravel regarding the social manipulation campaign Odette had been conducting for the better part of a year. Lord Kilthorne had arrived with a legal team, and the expression of a man who believed social position was the same as evidence. It was not. But before the session, they moved. I received a note delivered to my attic room, which meant they knew where I lived, telling me that if I wished to avoid certain professional and personal complications, I should present myself at the South Harbor, Pier 7, before sunrise. The note had no signature. The handwriting was not in any system I recognized. I brought the note directly to Seraphine, which took 20 minutes. She read it. She folded it precisely along its original lines. "You're not going," she said. I wasn't planning to go. "Good." A pause. "But someone needs to go to Pier 7. "I know," I said. "I'll go." "Celia." "With you," I said. "Both of us. I know that pier. I know the warehouse layout. And if Odette or Kilthorne has sent someone there to either collect something or dispose of something, we need to know what." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. We went before dawn, taking a route I knew, through the Chandler's district, along the river wall, down to the South Docks by a way that was not lit by street lamps, but that I could have walked blind. The harbor was cold and smelled of brine and tar and the particular heavy smell of ropes soaked in salt water. Pier 7 was quiet, which was unusual even at that hour. What we found in the warehouse at the end of Pier 7 was a courier, not from my office, a different service, a private one, attempting to remove a locked box that I recognized from the Peller shipping manifest. What we also found was Lady Odette Ravenscar, who had arrived before us and was attempting to do the same thing. She turned when she heard us enter. In the dim lamplight of the warehouse, she was not golden and smooth as she had been at every social occasion. She was tired and precisely frightened, and the beauty was still there, but the net was not working, because there was nothing to catch. I said, "That box contains the correspondence archive from the Peller office. My copies are with Solicitor Vane. Removing the originals won't change anything." She looked at me, then at Seraphine. "Seraphine," she said, and there was something like an appeal in her voice. "We've known each other for 15 years. 18, Seraphine said. "I know exactly what this is." Odette looked at the box. She looked at the door. The hired courier had already gone, which was either professional wisdom or cowardice. "You can surrender the box," Seraphine said, "and come to the council session this morning and let the evidence speak. Or you can attempt to leave, and I will have this building surrounded by Vane's officers before you reach the pier entrance." She paused. "I would genuinely prefer the first." Odette sat down on a crate. She pressed one perfectly manicured hand against her face. "He told me it was legal," she said. "You knew it wasn't," Seraphine said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was certain. The council session was 4 hours long. I sat in the observer's gallery with my hands folded and my notes in my satchel and watched Lord Kilthorne's face go through several stages of color as the evidence was presented. His legal team objected continuously and was overruled continuously. Odette had come as Seraphine had asked, and her account, partial, self-serving, but corroborating the documents, did significant damage to Kilthorne's position. I was called to speak briefly as the courier who had traced the correspondence trail. I had been afraid of that. I had imagined standing in front of 40 council members and losing my voice completely, losing all my careful words in a room full of people who measured worth in estate acreage and family crests. Seraphine had said the night before, "Speak exactly as you speak to me. That is all you need." I stood and spoke. I described the black wax seal and the northern supplier. I described the handwriting analysis and the ink patterns. I described what I had found at the pier and what the documents contained. I spoke clearly and without deference and without apology. When I sat down, Seraphine did not look at me, but under the observer's gallery table, She briefly pressed her fingers against the back of my hand. The council found for Valehart House. Lord Kelthorne's land seizure authorization was voided. Lady Odette Ravenscar was removed from 2 social committees and required to submit to a period of supervised correspondence. Kelthorne faced formal censure and a legal investigation that would run for months. Seraphine's name was cleared before the close of the session. After, in the corridor, surrounded by people offering congratulations and the noise of a building in motion, she stood very still and simply breathed. I stood beside her. I did not say anything. She found my hand without looking down and held it for a moment before releasing it, and then she composed herself entirely and walked back into the fray, and I watched her do it with a feeling in my chest that was too large for the corridor and probably too large for me. The months after were different from the months before. Seraphine took me to the courthouse personally to have my courier license formally noted in connection with the Valehart case, which was a legal protection I had not known to ask for. She asked Solicitor Vane to help me establish an independent correspondence office, not just a Harrow Street posting, but my own office, my own mark, my own clients, private letters, confidential deliveries, the kind of work that required both intelligence and discretion. I called it the Wren office. Nessa joined me 4 weeks after it opened. She said she had always thought I would end up somewhere peculiar, and she preferred to be there to watch. Seraphine and I were not quiet about what we were to each other. We were not loudly demonstrative. That was not her way. And I had come to appreciate the specific quality of her restrained tenderness, the way it felt more genuine for being controlled, the way a carefully selected word meant more from her than a fusion would have meant from anyone else. Society whispered, as it had always whispered about her, and with the addition of me, it whispered more creatively. We did not alter our behavior for the whispers. We altered nothing. On a morning in late spring, with the city coming back to itself after the long winter and the glass greenhouse thick with new growth, I came to Valehart House with a letter. Not a courier's delivery. Not a client's parcel. A single sealed envelope closed with a small blue wax seal I had chosen for myself. No crest, just a small pressed shape of a wren's wing. Seraphine was in the greenhouse when the maid brought me in. She was at the lemon tree, which was, impossibly stubbornly, in defiance of every reasonable botanical expectation, putting out new growth. Small and yellow-green and apparently convinced it belonged here, in this cold northern city, in this warm glass room, against all odds. She turned when I came in. She looked at the envelope. Something changed in her face immediately. Not alarm, not wariness. Something warmer. "What is this?" she asked. "A letter," I said. "I can see it's a letter." She took it from me very carefully. The way she handled things she wanted to preserve. She turned it over. She touched the seal with her thumb, slowly. "Wren office?" "Not exactly," I said. "That one is from me specifically, in a private capacity." She broke the seal and read it. It was short. I had spent 3 weeks writing it, and it was still only 9 lines, because everything that needed to be in it was either very simple or very specific, and either way did not need more words than that. It was an invitation to a life I had been building, to a morning of tea and letters and the strange freedom of having come through danger and arrived somewhere unexpected and found that it was, against all likelihood, home. She read it twice. She folded it along careful lines. She placed it in the pocket of her morning dress, close to her side. "You kept the seal," she said. "It's mine," I said. I wasn't going to waste it. She crossed the greenhouse to me through the green warmth and the smell of living things, and she took my face in both hands. And she looked at me for a long moment with the full weight of everything she had held back and managed and refused to show for so many years. And none of it was held back now. "Yes," she said, "to all of it." And she kissed me there in the light, beside the impossible lemon tree, in the warmth of the glass house where impossible things continued to grow despite all reasonable expectations. And I kissed her back. And outside the spring was beginning. and the city below was full of letters going from hand to hand, secret and open and ordinary and extraordinary, carrying the weight of everything people could not say directly until they finally could.